All right, let's just dive right into this, shall we? When you think of Italian football, what pops into your head? You probably imagine, flawless, impenetrable defending, fanatical crowds, and these incredibly deep ancient traditions. But here's the crazy part. The history of the sport in Italy is actually built on a deliberately constructed myth. So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we are going to deconstruct the fascinating, completely chaotic, and honestly, often contradictory origins of Italian football. Let's get started. Now, to really wrap our heads around this incredible story, we're heavily relying on John Foot's definitive history book, Calcio. And what this book reveals is absolutely crucial. Football in Italy isn't just a sport. It is literally a fanatical civic religion. To truly understand Italy, and I mean its politics, its intense regional culture divides, its entire modern history, you absolutely have to understand football. The two are just completely inseparable. And that actually brings us to the word itself, calcio. So it literally translates to the word kick, but it's the official Italian word for football. Now, you might be wondering, why not just say football, like pretty much every other European nation does? Well, adopting the word calcio back in 1909 was a very deliberate, politically motivated move. Italian nationalists essentially wanted to reject any foreign influence and just plant their own flag, basically attempting to claim the game's origins entirely for themselves. And Mussolini's fascist regime? They pushed a massive historical myth to back this whole thing up. They tried to claim that modern football evolved directly from Calcio Fiorentino, which, if you don't know, was this violently chaotic 27-a-side game played by nobles back in Renaissance Florence. They went so far as to stage these big, tourist-friendly versions of it, but the actual reality? It's a lot less romantic. The true roots of Italian football actually came from British expats, textile workers, and sailors, just kicking a heavy ball around in port towns like Genoa and Livorno. Section 1. The British Pioneers. How expats kicked off a religion. So, the crucial point here is who actually started it all. You've got guys like Edoardo Basio, a textile worker, who literally just brought footballs back in his luggage from England to Turin in 1891. And then there's Dr. James Richardson Spenceley, an English maritime doctor who set up the first real game in Genoa in 1898. But here is the wild part. These early clubs originally operated exactly like British expat societies. Genoa even had strict quotas initially, and get this, not to limit foreigners, but to protect the English players by strictly limiting the number of Italians who were even allowed to join. We really have to put this sporting history into perspective, though. Picture this. It's May 1898. Italy's first ever football championship takes place in Turin. It is this tiny amateur affair, just 4 teams, played out in a single day with maybe 100 spectators tops. But at that exact same moment, the city of Milan is being torn apart by deadly bread riots. We're talking massive barricades in the streets, martial law being declared, and the army tragically killing around 400 people. So early football, it was this almost irrelevant, tiny distraction, while Italian society was literally tearing itself apart at the seams. Section 2. The birth of the giants, tracing the big clubs. Okay, so the growth from that point is just remarkably fast. In 1897, a bunch of high school students in Turin found a club named Youth, in Latin, which, you guessed it, is Juventus. Then, in 1898, Genoa wins that very first championship. Boom. A year later, in 1899, expats and industrialists team up to form AC Milan. Fast forward to 1906, and a group of Swiss men wearing bowler hats actually meet up in a beer hall to create Torino. And finally, in 1908, a group of rebels actually leaves AC Milan because they were furious about a federation ban on foreign players. They go off and form Internazionale, or Inter Milan, deliberately welcoming international players. So in just over a single decade, the absolute DNA of modern Italian football was locked right into place. And I have to say, these early founders were really larger-than-life characters. Take Herbert Kilpin, the English founder of AC Milan. He famously declared, and I quote, "Our shirts must be red because we are devils. Let's put in some black to give everyone a fright." I mean, how cool is that? Kilpin was honestly just an obscure run-of-the-mill player back in England. But over in Italy, he became arguably the country's very first footballing legend, personally designing that iconic red and black kit that quite literally still strikes fear into opponents today. Section 3. Paleocalcio and Early Chaos. Now, you have to understand the early game was entirely, totally unstructured. I mean, look at this. Goalkeepers, they rarely ever actually caught the heavy leather ball. They usually just punched it or kicked it away. The offside rule was a nightmare because it applied to the entire pitch, not just the opponent's half, which obviously made attacking incredibly difficult. And substitutes? Yeah, absolutely none. Zero. If you got injured, tough luck, your team just played a man down. In fact, substitutions wouldn't even be officially allowed until 1968. Honestly, the realities on the pitch back then were just completely absurd. For instance, you had that same Herbert Kilpin literally keeping a bottle of whiskey stashed in a little hole behind the goal, and he'd take a sip every single time he conceded a point. Or how about this? During a massive 20-0 win, Milan's goalkeeper got so incredibly bored that he dragged a wooden chair onto the pitch and just sat there smoking cigarettes while the game was happening. Plus, players were running around in long trousers, little caps, and full-on button-up shirts. Oh, and my favorite part, if a massive crowd invaded the pitch, the rudimentary rules actually dictated that the game had to be replayed immediately, which, as you can imagine, just strongly encouraged losing fans to invade the pitch constantly. Well, as fun as it sounds, that amateur chaos obviously couldn't last forever. In 1912, an Englishman named William Garbett becomes Genoa's first true professional manager, and he completely disrupted the Italian footballing world by doing something wild, actually making his players practice. I know, shocking. He brought in organized dribbling exercises, he supervised jumping drills, and he utterly revolutionized the dressing room by introducing, wait for it, hot showers. Honestly, it was a real game changer. It was the true beginning of modern professional infrastructure in the sport.
Section 4. War, Politics, and Professionalism. 26. That is a heavy number. You see, when World War I broke out, the football championship was immediately suspended. And this staggering number represents the 26 players and staff from just one single club, Inter Milan, who lost their lives in the trenches. This even included their young, promising captain, Virgilio Fossati. The war absolutely devastated Italian society, and as a result, it completely decimated the ranks of these early football pioneers.
And when the survivors finally returned home, the horrific violence of the war unfortunately just spilled directly right onto the pitch. In 1920, there was this intense event known as Viareggio's Red Days. What started as just a regular disputed football match between Lucca and Viareggio rapidly turned into a massive, violent brawl. The military police arrived on the scene, a massive panic ensued, and a local linesman was tragically shot dead. In response, the completely enraged crowd actually seized rifles, blocked the railway lines, cut all the telephone wires, and a full-blown armed anarchist uprising took over the entire town for days. It just goes to show how football passion was dangerously intertwined with this intense post-war political fury. So, in this incredibly highly politicized post-war atmosphere, symbols really mattered. And this exact environment led to the introduction of the Scudetto in the 1923-1924 season. If you watch Italian football, you know the Scudetto. It's that little tricolor shield patch, matching the Italian national flag that gets sewn directly onto the shirts of the championship-winning team for the entire following season. It's a brilliant example of how the sport was actively inventing its own deeply patriotic traditions, officially moving away from its British expat origins and fully, permanently integrating itself into Italian national identity. Of course, with this massive cultural importance came massive amounts of money, signaling the inevitable end of the amateur era. It happened in phases. First, clubs realized they desperately needed the absolute best players to win, so they started secretly paying them. They'd give them these totally fake jobs as bank clerks or cover massive, highly suspicious travel expenses. Eventually, though, the hypocrisy was just too much to maintain. This led to the 1926 Viareggio Charter, which finally officially recognized professional wages. And guys, once those floodgates opened, that was it. Big clubs immediately bought up all the best talent, transforming football from a quirky weekend hobby into a ruthless, multi-million-dollar business almost overnight. So as you can see, football in Italy didn't just grow alongside the country. It was fundamentally shaped by its wars, its shifting political regimes, and its deep social struggles. Which leads us to a final question I'd love for you to consider about your own hometown. How do the local sports reflect the hidden political, cultural, and social history of your region? Think about the team names, the bitter rivalries, the colors they wear. What are they really telling you about the place where you live? Keep questioning the history around you. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time.